Welcome to Today with Dr. Kaye. I'm Dr. Kaye Wise Whitehead, here again to talk with you about some of the stories that matter. For the past couple of weeks, all we've been talking about in the news is what's been happening with St. Francis Academy and the MIAA. When a conversation is about sports, not conversations about race and class. We talked about it on Friday. We need to revisit it today because it has now become a national story. Baltimore City is back in the spotlight again. This time it's about sports, and I'm arguing that every conversation about sports is a conversation about race and about class. We will have that conversation today. Now, please note that yesterday marked the beginning of the #SayHerName National Week of Action to end violence against all Black women, girls, and femmes. According to their material, we are now living in a time where the dignities of Black people are being snatched away through every interaction with the police and with the criminal justice system. It has become fully apparent that the livelihoods of Black people, they're under attack, people. It's not new information. We've talked about it before. But with the Say Her Name National Week of Action, that as we fight to seek justice for our people, there seems to be a glaring lack of intentionality around the centering of the experiences and the general protection of Black women, Black girls, and Black femmes who are generationally targeted and abused through gendered, state-sanctioned violence. According to Say Her Name, we cannot let that stand. So, folks, here on Today with Dr. Kaye, we stand in solidarity with them. We wanted to take a moment to say her name. Because although Black women are routinely killed, raped, and beaten by the police, their experiences are rarely discussed and explored in our discussions about police brutality. Now, I'm sure many of you can say the names and tell the stories of Freddie Gray and Mike Brown and Tamir Rice and Eric Garner, but can you speak about Corinne Gaines, Rekia Boyd, Charlena Siobhan Lyles, Maya Hall, for example? Black women who've been killed by the police. We say her name because, as Angela Davis once said, Black women have had to develop a larger vision of our society than perhaps any other group. They have had to understand white men, white women, and Black men, and they have had to understand themselves. When Black women win victories, it is a boost for virtually every. There's a lot going on in America. And we're going to talk about that in our second hour. We're going to discuss the new school police rules that we'll be voting on at the school board meeting tonight, and about an issue that keeps coming up. Maryland is pushing hard to start arming their teachers. They're now talking about arming church folks. Do guns belong in schools? Do guns belong in churches? We're going to talk about that in the second hour. But first, for the past couple of weeks, St. Francis Academy. It's been in the news. It sparked discussions about the impact of race in sports and whether or not we are living in two Baltimores. Because it has generated so much steam, we wanted to revisit the topic, but make it just a little bit broader. Folks, I'm arguing that a conversation about sports is about race and it is about class. Sociologist Eric Davis said that sports are essentially a reflection of the best of who we are and the worst of who we are as a society. I want to open up the phone lines. I am bringing on a guest coming in from Gilman School, will join us in the second half of this hour to talk about his experience with football. But now I want to hear from you. 410-319-8888. Talk to me about your opinion around St. Francis Academy. What should happen? They are no longer going to be playing against any of the schools in this area that were part of the MIAA. We talked about the fact that Calvert Hall said they wouldn't play against them. Loyola Blakefield said they wouldn't play against them. Mount St. Joe's said they wouldn't play against them. Spalding has come out, and so has Gilman. The only option for St. Francis Academy, a historically Black school that's been around since 1828, that's been educating African Americans since, 190 years. The option now is to play with a nationwide roster, which is going to be incredibly expensive. People are telling me it has nothing to do with race. It's all about school safety. I am arguing that conversations about school safety become code words for conversation about other things. Let's talk about it. 410-319-8888. Conversations about St. Francis Academy. Are we really talking about the fact that we're now dealing with the real issue around two Baltimores? Are there two different experiences in this city? We've talked about this before. We know it exists when we start talking about neighborhoods. Many of you understand that if you go to East Baltimore, You go over to Mount Washington, you will have two different experiences. We also have talked about the fact that we have neighborhoods in Baltimore that are food deserts where people can't get access to fresh fruits and vegetables within walking distance of their homes. We also know if we go to other communities, I'm thinking of Hamden off the top of my head, you can find so many places to get fresh fruits and vegetables. Two Baltimores. We also know we start talking about what the state of our roads look like. We can go into certain communities, economically challenged communities, and there are potholes everywhere. And then we go into the communities within the White L and the streets are beautiful. Two Baltimores. We can talk about predatory policing. We can go into communities in Baltimore City that are economically challenged, and the police treat you differently in those communities than they do in, say, I don't know, Roland Park community. Two Baltimores. And now here we are with St. Francis Academy stacked up against the other predominantly white private schools. It's reflecting on what this city looks like. I've often argued that Baltimore City is a microcosm of America. And what is happening with St. Francis Academy on one side and Loyola Blakefield, Calvert Hall, Mount St. Joe's, Spalding on the other side is just another indicator that this city is deeply divided and we need to find a way to come together. How do we get there? How do we take this conversation, which on the surface is just about school safety, player safety, and who should be invited to the table, but underneath it gets to a bigger issue that we've been dealing with and struggling with in this city for a very long time. Let's talk about it. 410-319-8888. While you're getting your thoughts together and thinking about how you want to join this conversation, let me just throw out some statistics for you. Because I went and did some research. You know I'm not a sports person. But I've been following this very, very closely. At this point here, if you think about what's happening with sports in this country, 68% of NFL players, for example, are African American. Even though black folks only make up 13.1% of the population, we are in the minority. We're the marginalized community, but we make a majority of the NFL players. But think about that. There are no black owners. So we are the players and not the owners. How does this divide reflect larger issues about race? Now, I enjoy sports. I know that sports can bring inspiration and life skills and a sense of community on one hand. But on the other hand, socioeconomic inequality, cultural pressure on some folks from marginalized communities to grow up to be athletes, and a lack of financial literacy. How often do you meet young African-American boys coming from economically challenged communities saying, when I grow up, I want to be, what do they put in the blank? LeBron. They want to grow up and be Kobe. And we often argue about the fact that why are we not helping them to want to grow up to be lawyers and doctors and judges? Why is it just athletics and rappers? On one hand, how is that tied to this issue of race and class? 410-319-8888. I have Ron on the phone. Ron, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
How are you? And they tell me you're a new caller, Ron?
Yes, I am.
Well, then I have to say welcome to the family.
I listen often, but I was just compelled to call today because of the subject.
Yes, thank you for calling.
Years ago, and I go back in the 60s, in high school sports, I participated, and there was a thing with the track teams of Baltimore City, Douglas and Carver, and the black schools went to the pin relays, but I went to City College, and we weren't allowed to go.
Now, why weren't you allowed to go? Is it because of the finances to get there, or because your school didn't support it, or why?
We were willing to raise the money, but it was a thing where nothing was said, but we just weren't allowed to go. And it was a thing where what it seemed was that the transition of the population of the school, was like turning more black than it was previously. Mm-hmm. And they didn't go before, and as the population of the school changed over to, I would say probably at that time it was probably 50-50, but still, we were holding championships for years, 15 years in a row, undefeated.
But they wouldn't let you go and compete.
They wouldn't let us go to flex our muscles, so to speak.
Right. To compete on the highest level is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So now, why do you think that is? Because I argue that when you talk about sports, race and class have to be on the table as well. How do you think that fits in, Ron?
I agree. On another situation, I played on a football team, a Sandlot football team. And if you all remember Charlie Rudo's
Yes, I do.
Sporting Goods.
Yes.
Well, Charlie Rudo's son was in my gym class, and I went over there to buy something, and he asked me, did I want to play football? So I said, not only do I want to play, all my friends want to play.
Mm.
So they had a league, it's called the Free State League, and Pikesville was like the chumps of that league. They really lost. They came in last place. Well, we joined our team.
Did it turn it around, Ron? I mean, I can see where you're going. When you joined that team, did the team turn around and start winning?
The team in their first game, we beat the previous league year's champion 26-0.
I'm sure it changed the entire conversation at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's what we're seeing with St. Francis, right? So all of a sudden, St. Francis is dominating.
They kicked us out of the league.
They kicked you out of the league?
They found an excuse to kick us out of the league. They said we beat the referee up. Now, we knew this referee because he called at Booker T. This guy was a big, like, odd job in the movie.
So it didn't. So they said that, but that didn't happen. They found a way to kick you out because you're saying your team started to dominate.
Well, see, the other thing was that the Solace Point team was black, and they had won their division the previous year.
Okay.
And so they didn't want two black teams to play in a championship.
That's what I'm saying. It's the conversation. Ron, thank you so much for calling. Folks, conversations about sports are conversations about race and class. Now, you might disagree with me. You might say, no, if we're just talking about sports, separate that from race and class. If that is your perspective, then you've got to tell me where you got this information from. You need to give me some facts and some data to back this up, because I'm looking at the racial makeup of certain sports, particularly sports where it's going to take a lot of money in order to get your child there, where you need parents at home or grandparents or neighbors to be able to shuffle your child back and forth. Off the top of my head, I think about lacrosse. I mean, I think about the fact that it is very difficult if you are economically challenged, if you're working more than one job, for your child to play lacrosse. Think about golf. Think about tennis. Think about baseball. Think about swimming. Think about these sports where there's some racial and economic issues tied up in that I think we must address. 410-319-8888. I want to play a clip from Coach Nick. He's the athletic director from St. Francis Academy. Let's take a listen to what he had to say, and then I'll take your calls on the other side.
Our focus and my principal focus, Dr. Curtis Turner, has always been about our young men and young women. So people are going to have opinions. They're going to say what they're going to say. We sent 13 of those young men that's playing football to 2 colleges on 4 scholarships. Those kids are graduating from college. And our focus is about just preparing our young people for the world. So I don't really want to get into what people are saying or what's their thoughts. I think it's pretty sad that most time it's other African Americans trying to tear down, a school that's here for our community. So we just trying to focus on the young men and young women, make sure we're doing everything and everything that's best for them while they're in our care, and just prepare them for the world. So what others think, we're gonna continue doing what we're doing.
All right, so that was Coach Nick when he was on the show on Friday, and he was talking about this controversy with St. Francis Academy. It was in the Baltimore Sun on Sunday, and the title of the article is, "When Football Teams Refuse to Play an Inner-City Powerhouse Like St. Francis, Is It Safety or Bias?" This is something I've been wrestling with and I've been thinking about. If the schools are saying that they're choosing not to play because of player safety, that's the code that they're using. Is the code player safety code for something else? Because are they just concerned about the safety issues now? If safety is truly your concern, you don't play against St. Francis. What happens if next year Loyola Blakefield, Calvert Hall, Mount St. Joe's plays another team and there's another issue around safety? Maybe they have players who have concussions. Will they then not play that team? or will this conversation that involves St. Francis, will it end this year? That's what I mean. Conversations about sports. There are other issues at play, and I want to hear from you. 410-319-8888. I have Shelly on the phone. Shelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you? Thank you for calling.
I'm good. My thoughts, in order to be the best, you have to play the best.
Mm-hmm.
When the kids get to the collegiate level, will they compete for a spot or will they shy away from the competition?
Oh, wow.
High school
but what's the lesson, though, Shelly?
Level.
Now, Shelly, I'm asking you, what's the lesson that we're teaching young people if we say you're not winning, so we just won't play them anymore?
I think that's soft. That's a soft way, to go out. You have to, like I said, play the best to be the best. And at the collegiate level, you're going to have to compete for a spot. High school sports prepare you for that next level.
But do you think there's another issue that's happening here, Shelly? I mean, because people are pushing back and telling me that this is not about race, Dr. Kaye. You keep making everything about race and class. What do you think, Shelly, with these particular schools all saying that they will not play a school that's only been dominating for about a year or so?
Well, I feel like it's about race. The independent schools, predominantly white schools, and St. Francis is a black school. So why not play the black school? Why take that from them if they only won, 2 years?
Right. And really, it's been the last year. Coach Nick said they've really been dominating the last year where they were able to run roughshod. They are number one. But we're not talking about a team that's been number one for 20 years or 10 years. It hasn't even been that long.
This didn't come up when Gilman was winning.
When Gilman won 13 championships, right? In 19 years under Coach Poggi.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. Shirley, thank you so much for calling.
Thank you.
We have Robert on the phone. Robert, thank you for calling the show.
Thank you. How are you today, Dr. Kaye?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much.
Good. Dr. Kaye, I just wanted to piggyback off of a comment you made when you first started the show. And you said about, we need to all come to the table.
Yes.
That's the problem, Dr. Kaye. We're the only ones at the table. They're not coming to the table. They're not coming. They're not going to give up white privilege. That's the problem. We are at the table. Every black talk show I hear across, if you remember me, I'm from Philadelphia.
I remember.
Yes. Every black WURD down in Philly and New York, and I travel a lot. All the black radio stations, we're all saying the same thing. But if you listen to the white stations, which I do, they're not talking about that at all. They're not coming to the table.
Then how do we change this reality? That's my concern, Robert. If we can't get everyone to the table, then these conversations that need to happen will never actually solve the issue because we're just talking about the same thing over and over again.
Well, Dr. Kaye, obviously you're a very intelligent person. You got a doctor's degree, and I am definitely older than you, okay? Dr. Kaye, I'd have heard this conversation since I was a child and was still having it, and I'm almost ready to leave the planet.
Oh, man.
It's sad. I'm just being real. It's very... and in reference to, I don't know anything about St. Francis, don't know where it is, but whatever. And to answer your question about that, what else is it but race? I read it when it said it's not safe. What are you talking about? It's just always, and everything in America is about race.
I absolutely. But you know what? That's the thing, Robert. I agree. Some people tell me I'm colored by race all the time, but I'm saying that's the elephant that's always in the room every single time.
Always in the room. People say that to me. Oh, yeah, look, I'm an eternal optimist. I look at the glass half full. I've lived my life like that. But when it comes to race, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Thank you so much, Robert. We have Tanya on the phone. Tanya, thank you so much for calling.
Yes.
Well, they tell me you're a new caller, right?
Yes.
Well, first I have to welcome you to the family. Thank you for giving me a call.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm just concerned about the narrative because it's a few things that hasn't been said. St. Francis gets to recruit nationwide, so they're getting the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
When these other private schools, they're taking the local, students within the state of Maryland. Okay, so then you also, with St. Francis, you have a program where it allows the students to, play an extra year in high school, meaning you got a lot of 19-year-olds now that's there. And if you look at some of those, and I've been to the games. So if you look at some of their students in comparison to some of the 10th, 11th, and 12th graders that are in varsity, well, that year between 18, 19, that's a pretty good growth year.
Right.
So you got a lot of people that look like grown men or even fathers on those teams. So I'm feeling like, you know, where they get to recruit nationwide, they're getting the best of the best. So they want to become a sports powerhouse. So are they becoming more of a sports powerhouse and not necessarily all that concerned about the academic progress of their students? They just looking at being a funnel for a sporting team. So you also got to look at that. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of these other Catholic schools saying, well, no, we're not going to play them because they're already power-packed. So maybe they should get in the league where they're just playing other nationwide schools. Because, you know, get into a league that does the same thing that they do. Because they're setting themselves up to be just, you know, champions all the time. And I just don't think that playing field is level.
Let me answer a couple of those things. So I'm actually concerned with what you're saying. So one, about the sports powerhouse for the academic progress. Now, I read that St. Francis, this is the official documentation that they put out, that all 18 or 19 of their seniors from this year have all gone on to college. And not all of them are playing football. One of them, in fact, went on to Georgetown, and he's going to be pre-med going into Georgetown. Second, with the extra year in high school, but Tanya, I saw that at a couple of schools. I've seen reclassification happening in basketball. I've seen it happening in golf. So I know it doesn't just happen for football, and it doesn't just happen at St. Francis. But this thing around recruiting nationwide, so you know for a fact that the other schools don't recruit. I know that there are players who come on the other teams who may live in Pennsylvania, but I haven't heard of anything farther than that.
Right. No, they're not recruiting nationwide. They're recruiting locally.
Okay.
They're recruiting locally.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tanya, for giving us a call. Folks, we're going to leave it here for just a moment. When we come back, Howard, Leo, Tim, stay with us. I will take your call. I'll also be joined by a former football player from Gilman who also played under Coach Poggi. We'll hear his thoughts. We're talking about the controversy around St. Francis Academy. When are conversations about sports not about race and class as well? This is Today with Dr. K. I'm Dr. Kaye Whitehead. Stay with us.